So in answer to your question, Steve, how did I go from being, a relatively young, very ambitious, slightly inexperienced, newly qualified chartered accountant with PwC to being head of corporate finance and partner here at RG? Well, let's go back to 2006. So that's when I decided, Steve, that I needed to leave Big Four, and specifically the audit and assurance service line to pursue a career in corporate finance. And at that point, what I was looking for, Steve, was to identify a national firm that could give me access to corporate finance, worked predominantly with a privately owned entrepreneurial client base, and would give me direct exposure to M&A. So effectively helping position businesses for acquisitions, disposals, IPOs, buyouts, buy-ins, etc. And at that time, Steve, there were really in the Northeast only 2 or 3 viable options, because I wasn't looking for Big Four, because of course I was leaving PwC. I was looking for large national, and at that stage, the only firms that I really could consider approaching were the likes of Baker Tilly, what was then Tenon, but became RSM, and then finally Grant Thornton. So I approached those 3 businesses, and I decided to join what was then Tenon, but became RSM. Because at that point, RSM was a top 10 firm. It was a national firm, and it was probably the firm, Steve, who had the largest corporate finance capability in the north of England. And of course, don't forget, at that point, I had no corporate finance experience. So I wanted to work within a team that could give me that exposure and that experience.
I've got to ask, is corporate finance where all the cool kids go?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends who's asking, Steve, and how you define cool kids. But for sure, it's the service line that I think is most interesting, and definitely extracts from you the broadest skill set and demands from you the most varied experience and expertise, because at any moment in time, you can be advising on the sale of a large business to a PLC. You can be advising a relatively inexperienced management team who are looking to complete a buyout. And you could also be simultaneously advising on a large acquisition on behalf of a PLC. So it does require great negotiation. It requires a huge amount of proactivity. You've got to be brilliant when it comes to technical nuances, because when you're advising on the sale of a business, there are many moving parts. Absolutely have to be able to communicate quickly, effectively, always. And fundamentally, you have to be someone who is driven to help clients create value. Okay. And of course, with finance, it is incredibly easy to demonstrate the value you add.
I think what's quite interesting, and it just kind of came to me then, is almost tax and audit within a framework, you try and get the best result you can. But likewise, what you do, there is no upper ceiling, so that when you work with a customer and you work on the journey and the acquisition and the target and who you do and all the stuff we're about to touch on, in theory, there's no upper limit. So likewise, when you're trying to decide which partner, which company do you work with to help you sell your business, there's a real big element of trust to have someone that is very entrepreneurial themselves to help you really push the boundary.
It's a really interesting observation, Steve, and you're absolutely right. So, when you are providing tax advice, clearly there is tax legislation that must be respected and must be followed. Of course, you can provide advice which means your client is being as tax efficient as possible, but fundamentally there are boundaries. Within corporate finance, the only boundary is the client's own expectations of themselves. Everything is in the art of the possible. And that's what inspires me to practice as a corporate finance advisor, Steve, because I love nothing more than meeting 2 ambitious, hungry, able entrepreneurs who have set up a business with, say, £10,000 of seed capital and want to disrupt a market or want to build a great business for all of the reasons that will be pertinent to them. I love nothing more than helping them make that business a reality And of course, 10 years on, selling that business for 25 million. And that is what I do.